Would you believe that right now there are satellites orbiting our planet which could destroy it with just the push of a red button? That's not science fiction. Welcome to the channel. And today we're answering the extraordinary question: does China have a space weapon that can destroy the world? The use of space for military purposes isn't exactly a new idea. Just ask the United States, which has been launching objects into orbit since the 1950s, beginning with the launch of Explorer 1, which marked the dawn of America's space age and the start of the space race with the Soviet Union. And while those early satellites were used primarily to observe the cosmos, they also doubled as sophisticated spy platforms. After all, if you can send an object into space, then you can place sensors on that object and get a bird's eye view of what's happening anywhere on the planet below. Pretty quickly, the ability to gather intelligence from space became one of the most valuable aspects of maintaining a global military presence. But as the years went on, other uses for space began to reveal themselves. For starters, satellites started appearing in the sky that weren't just good at gathering intel, but were designed to jam enemy communications and even disrupt electronic systems on the ground. Then, before long, the first satellite specifically designed for missile warning appeared in the sky. And with it, the prospect of mutually assured destruction hung over the world like never before. But that was nothing compared to what was coming next. Because, while missile defense systems can be designed to take out incoming missiles, they're really only effective against ballistic missiles. But what happens when a nation wants to strike a target with a cruise missile? These missiles fly along a predictable path, but they do so at low altitudes and at speeds that make them really hard to track. So how does a missile defense system keep up? One way might be with a satellite, one that would be able to track these lower-flying cruise missiles as they move through the sky, and relay that information back to ground forces that are actually in a position to intercept. But where do you put such a satellite? To answer that, we have to look no further than 2008. When China launched a satellite called Tianhui-1, whose stated purpose was to test technologies associated with space-based missile defense systems. And while China said that the satellite was intended to help protect its upcoming Olympic Games from missile attack, some observers were less convinced. You see, the placement of the satellite's orbit made it well suited to track not only missiles, but aircraft and ships as well. And just a few months after its launch, another Chinese satellite entered orbit. This time, though, it wasn't placed in a standard orbital path. Instead, it took a polar orbit that brought it over every part of the Earth's surface twice per year, and observers noticed that its onboard imaging technology was similar to that found on spy satellites. The two combined meant that China had both a satellite that could detect incoming threats and one that could take pictures of targets on the ground. And while many nations maintain a handful of satellites that are used for intelligence gathering, China's actions suggested something different. The potential for a coordinated attack using satellites to deliver real-time intelligence to ground forces could spell big trouble for anyone targeted. And that sort of capability makes the use of satellites in warfare less about fighting in space and more about fighting with space. Of course, China wouldn't be the first to take this approach. In 1967, during the height of the space race, the U.S. launched the first of its Agena missile defense satellites into orbit. They were designed to warn the U.S. of attacks from Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles, and provided enough lead time for the U.S. to retaliate. While the world would come to know them as the bane of Star Wars, their original purpose was far more pedestrian. But once they were in space, they stayed there and continued to collect intelligence on the Soviet Union well beyond the end of their expected service life. But this isn't the Cold War, and there are a lot more players with access to advanced technology than just the U.S. and the USSR, which brings us to our present-day story. The story of a hijacked satellite that could have ended life on Earth. In December of 2013, a European Space Agency satellite known as the Breeze upper stage left its launch site strapped to the top of a Ukrainian Zenit 3SB rocket. Its mission was simple: hit a predetermined set of coordinates in space and release the satellite that was riding on top of it. But that didn't happen. Instead, once it reached orbit, the Breeze began firing its engines erratically and ended up stranded in space, unable to reach its target. At first, it was easy to blame human error. After all, Breeze had been designed decades ago during the twilight days of the Soviet Union and had seen better days. But, as it turned out, the satellite was behaving in a way that suggested something else was at work. Something designed to make sure that the satellite Breeze never reached its destination. Breeze was supposed to be carrying a commercial communication satellite operated by a company called Skynet. And Skynet wanted the satellite positioned in a geosynchronous Earth orbit, a spot directly opposite the Sun. That way, it could reliably communicate with stations on the ground throughout Europe and the Middle East. But the Breeze couldn't reach that orbit, not without a little help. And while we don't know who or what was behind the hijacking, there are plenty of clues that point us toward the culprit. Like, for example, the fact that the satellite was steered away from its target by precisely 4.4 degrees. And there's just one country in the world whose anti-satellite capabilities could manage such a maneuver. The US, it sounds like a plot straight out of a Tom Clancy novel. After all, why would the US try to sabotage a satellite that was destined for a foreign power? Well, for the same reason it sabotages enemy satellites today, to deny those assets to its enemies. You see, any nation that launches a satellite into orbit has gained access to space. And while not every nation wants to be in the business of launching weapons into space, having the ability to do so gives you a significant advantage. So if you're worried about your enemy getting that advantage, it makes sense to try and stop them. And if you're paranoid enough, you might even try to shoot down their satellites. But doing that isn't easy. I mean, these things are flying high above the Earth, and shooting anything down from that far away is a difficult proposition. But the US already had a solution to that problem. It's called a orbital vehicle. If you want to hit something that's moving through the sky, it's helpful to meet it on the same plane. And that's what orbital vehicles offer. They're small satellites that are designed to match the orbit of a larger satellite or space station. And while it might sound like a pretty basic concept, it offers huge benefits for missions that require a little extra precision. After all, if you can get close enough to match someone's orbit, then you can do things that are impossible from miles away. Like for example, you could steal data from a satellite by intercepting its signals and feeding them into your own systems. Or, you could destroy a satellite by ramming it head-on or blowing it out of orbit by detonating explosives nearby. And that is exactly what happened with the NetRise in 2013. The satellite was hijacked and pushed out of orbit by a secret American orbital vehicle. But you don't need orbital vehicles to play dirty. As recently as 2007, the US successfully tested an anti-satellite missile that destroyed an old spy satellite called USA-193. The missile was fired from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California and met the satellite over the Pacific Ocean, where it detonated and blew the satellite out of the sky. But that's nothing compared to what China did in 2007, because that year, China became the third nation ever to shoot down one of its own satellites, a feat it accomplished with a ballistic missile fired from the Chinese mainland. It was a test to show off China's growing capabilities in space and a demonstration of its willingness to use force to defend its interests. After all, once the satellite was destroyed, China said it had cleared the debris before destroying the satellite. China was entering the space race, and it wasn't afraid to use whatever means necessary to win.